Thank you for the opportunity, seriously, to join you this morning. And let me begin by saying I think we do have a reason to be hopeful because in several important ways, the Paris Summit, which is still a few months away, really has already been successful. It has pushed national governments around the world to set higher goals for reducing carbon. It has shown international cooperation on climate change really is possible, and it has focused the world's attention on just how much work remains to be done. And I would like to touch on this morning one piece of that puzzle. There's an old expression in the English language that I think sums up the challenge before us today, and that is, you get what you pay for. It means, in short, that you can't pay for one thing and expect to get something better, and yet that's exactly what nations around the world are doing when it comes to climate change. Government leaders will soon gather in Paris to discuss how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and yet all over the world, at the same time they're gathering, governments are encouraging those emissions by subsidizing them. The International Energy Association has estimated that governments are providing $550 billion in subsidies to fossil fuel companies every single year, while at the same time, countries are only providing renewable energy companies with about $120 billion in subsidies. So 120 versus 550 billion. They say one thing and they do another. For every dollar that governments use to encourage the development of renewable energy, they are spending $4.50 to encourage the development and use of fossil fuels. You just get what you pay for. And right now we are paying for a hotter climate, a hotter planet, and perhaps a real disaster for humanity. If we were serious about slowing climate change, we would have to change that. We have to start, to use another American expression, putting our money where our mouth is. At the Copenhagen Climate Change Conference back in 2009, the OECD countries committed to delivering $100 billion per year to developing countries to help them transition to cleaner energy and adapt to the changing climate. That commitment has not yet been honored, but it must be. By using public dollars to attract private investment, the OECD countries could meet their commitment by providing only about $60 billion. As it turns out, the OECD released a report last month finding that OECD countries are spending more than $60 billion in fossil fuel subsidies every year. So the math really is clear. OECD countries could honor our commitment to the rest of the world by redirecting that $60 billion away from fossil fuels and towards clean energy and modern infrastructure for the global south. Now, there's another important reason to take this step, and it's perhaps the most important reason of all. Governments, NGOs, and philanthropists spend billions of dollars in the developing world to improve public health and saving lives. But there may be no single action that would do more to improve people's lives by giving them cleaner air to breathe than honoring the commitment that we made in Copenhagen. This is a piece of unfinished business that OECD countries must take care of, preferably before arriving in Paris, but certainly before leaving it. And that's not to let the rest of the world off the hook. Brazil, China, India, Russia, and South Africa, and the entire global community should join in this effort to begin phasing out fossil fuel subsidies. But the OECD must lead by example. And the good news is, business leaders and mayors throughout the OECD are leading, and they're already ready to do much more. Mayors and CEOs see climate change differently from legislators and differently than scientists. They see it as an opportunity to improve their bottom lines, strengthen their long-term foundations, and hedge against future risks. My own company, Bloomberg LP, has made significant investments in energy efficiency and renewable energy, not because we're altruistic, although we are, but nearly all of the company's profits are going to my foundation, Bloomberg Philanthropies, and we're going to use that to do good. But the real reason we're doing it is because it saves us money. It's just good business, and that's what I've tried to convince other people. It also helps attract employees, young people especially, who want to work for businesses that are environmental leaders. That gives us an edge over our competitors. almost every single young person that comes in for an interview starts asking us, what are you doing to help the world? They want to be part of it. And by us being part of it, letting them be part of it, we have a strategic advantage in recruiting them. Mayors, and I can speak with firsthand knowledge, see climate change in much the same way. Making their cities more efficient saves taxpayers money. But more importantly, it helps clean their air, which gives them a competitive edge over other cities. Because the fact is, people want to live in places with clean air. And people want to live, and where people want to live, businesses want to invest. You can take a look at New York City. During my time as mayor in New York City, we reduced New York City's carbon footprint by 19%, while at the same time far outpacing the rest of the country in job creation. We proved that fighting climate change and spurring economic growth go hand in hand. And of course, plenty of other cities are proving this to be true as well. During our 12 years in office, life expectancy in New York City improved 3 years, and it made it now 3 years greater than the national average across America. So if any of you have friends that you really care about that live elsewhere in the country, you get them to move here. I can't guarantee that every one of them will live 3 years longer, but I can guarantee that on average they really will. Those are real numbers, and they really do make a difference. Now, cities are struggling to get the national governments to recognize just how much progress they've made. If you can do it at a city level, common sense says you could do it at a state and federal level. Sadly, there has been in America virtually no progress made by the federal government and very little by state governments. All of the progress we've made in America has come from either the private sector that has reduced their energy consumption or turned to renewables, or city governments that have gone through regulations to get rid of garbage, more efficient, environmentally safe way, reduce carbon emissions from building, heating and cooling, got automobiles to not loiter in traffic as much, and where possible change the amount of oil that they use to drive. Now, last year, the United Nations and Bloomberg Philanthropies worked with 3 leading global city networks, C40, which I'm the president of, ICLEI, and United Cities and Local Governments, to help launch something called the Compact of Mayors. And I just wanted to explain to you what that is. The goal of the Compact is to document the progress cities are making and encourage more cities to join in this work. To take part in the Compact, cities are required to set a concrete target for reducing their carbon footprint. Then they have to create plans to reach that target and agree to publicly report their progress using a standardized common measurement tool. I've always believed if you can't measure something, you can't manage it. And when cities are all using the same measurement systems, they can compare results and adopt policies that are proving to be effective elsewhere, and the competitive juices start to go and start to bubble up. And also people can use that in deciding where to live or where to site their plants and their offices. And I'm glad to say that now over 175 cities have already joined the Compact that are homes to more than 250 million people. 250 million people live in those 175 cities. The Compact really is a powerful tool. It's not just something that we invent and we talk about and never turn into action. This is something that actually you have to perform, and everybody can see whether you're doing it and judge you, and there's a real economic impact if you're at the between being at the top of the list and being at the bottom of the list. We're so excited when the network of state and city governments created a similar framework. They just did this called the Compact of States and Regions. Why? Because they saw cities doing things and people started criticizing state and federal governments for not doing things. State and regional governments have considerable leeway to act on their own without needing help or permission from national governments. For instance, in our neighbors to the north, Canada, Quebec recently pledged to reduce carbon emissions 37% below 1990 levels by the year 2030, while Canada's national goal is closer to a laughable 2% reduction over that period. So today, I'm glad to announce that we're creating a formal alliance between the Compact of Mayors and the Compact of States and Regions. And we think this alliance will help us align the data and reporting systems that are helping cities and states measure their work. And we think it will also help us increase membership in both coalitions as cities work to recruit states and vice versa. It will also put pressure on the states to actually deliver what they say. This is one of the first times that you can measure a political promise and see whether or not somebody's delivered and hold the elected officials accountable, which is the only ways you're going to get them to really deliver on their promises. It's one thing to give a campaign speech. It's another thing, as we all know, to deliver results. In the cities, you see the results. Now we've got to move up the chain. If anyone doubts the collective power of cities, states, regions, and businesses, and the public to make huge strides on climate change, let me just tell you a quick story. After the federal cap-and-trade bill died in the U.S. Congress in 2009, where a lot of things seem to die, many in the environmental movement were greatly disappointed, and that is understandable. But consider this. The cap-and-trade bill aimed to reduce emissions by about 10% below 2005 levels by the year 2015. Today, in 2015, thanks largely to the work of the Sierra Club that they've done to retire coal-fired power plants, and also the leadership of cities and businesses, we have already exceeded that goal. I think that bears repeating. We exceeded the 2009 cap-and-trade goal without cap and trade. And while the federal government deserves some of the credit, most of it belongs to the people, cities, and businesses. So here's a case that even without national legislation, it shows that countries can make great progress if leadership comes from other places. Of course, we still need national governments to step up. They can do an awful lot more, and they can do some things that states and cities and local regions can't. We need them to begin phasing out fossil fuel subsidies, as I started talking earlier, and directing that money to help the global South make the same transition. We also need them to lift rules and regulations that limit cities, states, and businesses from making investments in cleaner energy and more modern infrastructure. The more we can do to empower sub-national governments with the tools that they need to make progress, the better our chances are of fighting against climate change, and the better we have a chance to force national governments to finally do something. That's what we think this new alliance will help us do, and I know all of you will continue to help support these efforts. So I just wanted to say personally, on behalf of my children and my grandchildren, thanks for all your efforts. Climate change is something we talk about, and we talk about many years from now, 2030, 2040, 2050. I like to phrase climate change in terms of public health and the environment. This is the air you and I and our children that are already born will breathe. This is the water that they will drink. This is the life they are not going to have. If we focus on doing short-term things, we will solve the long-term problem, but we'll also bring it back to the me and us, where people really start acting. So thanks again for your hard work, and let's make sure we make the most of these final months before we go to Paris. There's great food there, but there is the chance also to save the world. Thank you, and enjoy time. Bye.